Okay, we are going to be looking now at AC2.3 and we are going to be focusing on realism. Now, realism has got two branches, left and right realism. First and foremost, before we talk about the difference between left and right realism, I'm going to quickly draw out a little political seesaw here. Right, so I have my right wing and I'm going to have my left wing. And this is going to be the broadest and most basic of explanations politically here. If you do politics, you'll be like, oh, he's making this very simple, overly simple in fact, but this may be all you need to know to get your head around realism. So when we consider realism, both right and left realism are kind of more political perspectives than they are necessarily sociological. That's the first thing to remember about them. Now, they will agree with things, the right realists and the left realists. They will agree that crime is a big, serious problem that we need to deal with, and potentially the crime rate is going up. They would agree, therefore, with the official statistics on crime and show that they are accurate. And they would also want to come up with solutions, practical solutions that will lessen the crime rate. Now, why would you need both of those theories that are on different ends of a political spectrum to agree with those points? Well, because they're political, the ideas behind them might be useful to get votes, so you have to consider them as with a slight political edge, as much as you will do with a sociological edge. So when we think about left wing, we're obviously going to put left realism on here. And when I think about left wing, I think of liberal. And we tend to think a bit more desiring change in society, bit of a drive for equality. We tend to be a bit more anti-capitalist. And then we get on the right-hand side, conservative, mean keeping things the same, not changing things up. So conserving the ideas. So we want to maintain the status quo, and we tend to be a little bit more pro-capitalist. Now, if you think we have right realism on the right-hand side and left realism on the left, when you think of the other sociological theories that are covered in 2.3, where would they go? And I'm hopeful you're going, well, Marxism surely would be on the left, because we've looked at how Karl Marx doesn't want capitalism and wants to change, and wants communism, which he might be more equal, and he's certainly anti-capitalist. And then you might be able to go, right, functionalism can live on the right-hand side. Well, why? Well, functionalists think everybody's in consensus and agreement and see the world in a rose-tinted way where everything has a purpose. If everything's working great, why would you want to change it? You'd want to maintain the status quo. Interactionism, you could put broadly in the middle, not really wanting to change things or to make things different, but trying to maybe understand where things are coming from on a small scale, not a kind of big scale where you could make those kind of changes that Marxism would want or that the functionalists wouldn't want. So this is where they sit on a political seesaw. Now, if I divide it down the middle, we're going to talk about their relationship to crime. I'm going to start off with the right realists. Now, the key thing to remember is the difference between who is to blame. So the right realists will be blaming the individual for crime, and the left realists are going to blame the structure of society for crime. Go figure, they're sat on the left-hand side being a bit anti-capitalist, wanting a bit more equality. They're gonna think that. So let's talk first about right realism and some of their issues. So when we look at the causes for crime from a right realist, some arguments that they have are going to be biological. And you have Murray and Herrnstein, and you have Wilson and Herrnstein talking about biological differences. Wilson and Herrnstein suggesting that criminals are born, individual is responsible for crime, more aggressive or lacking impulse control, which logically leads them into criminality. Or, as Murray and Herrnstein controversially say in their book, The Bell Curve, that it is IQ that is linked fundamentally to criminality, and that those people who are maybe in working class groups have a lower IQ than those who are in middle class groups, and hence why criminality is more prevalent within the working classes. Controversial one, and as we've looked at in AC 2.1, when you look at Lombroso, For example, the physiological cause for crime being the atavistic traits. These ignore environmental issues, and also the idea of IQ is a very controversial one. A lot of people might be doubting the utility of IQ tests, even though they are a very good life predictor, and they don't like the idea that your IQ is not malleable through input from education and things like that. So lots of issues there, but you can tell already that blaming the individual for crime, this is going to be quite a controversial theory. And we move on to their next cause, which is socialization. Now, Charles Murray is going to say that effective socialization will prevent people from committing crime. And socialization, the process where we learn society's norms and values, is done primarily by one very important group, which is the family. And Murray would say if the family unit is not properly socializing kids, then they're going to end up criminal. In particular, he blames one particular family unit. He is kind of anti-lone parent family. And in particular, he says that because 90% of the time lone parent families are headed by females, and he's going to argue that they are ineffective socializers of young men who are then predisposed to crime because they've not got an effective role model in order to watch and grow up to be legitimate, law-abiding, well-socialized individuals. Support and evidence is going to come from that because of when you look in America, if you take the black community, which have got an overrepresentation in the crime statistics, there's a high degree of single parent families. I think over 60% of young black people are born now without a father figure in the home, or with parents who have separated. So that's where he's going to be taking his kind of points from. However, again, problems with this. Not every person who's from a lone parent family is going to be criminal, for starters. And of course, lone parent families, according to Jane Mooney, are more likely to be the victims of crime. So these lone parent mothers that Murray's been critical of are also likely to be the victims of crime compared to the rest of the population. So perhaps he's being critical here of people who are most likely victims rather than the creators of these criminals. Murray is going to be particularly blaming one group in society for this, a group he calls the underclass. Now, what I've drawn out here is a kind of traditional class structure in a hierarchy, and then what I've drawn over here very badly is kind of like a diamond shape. The underclass are a group that Murray would say are long-term unemployed, benefit reliant, and out of work. And because of this, this group are more likely to have lone parent families. So these groups that are below the middle class and the upper class and the working class who sit at the bottom, the underclass, will contribute to a disproportionate amount of the criminals in society. And he would want this group to get a job, stop being so lazy, stop being so welfare dependent on the state, on benefits, and teach their kids better norms and values to moralise them into a way that they can function within society in a non-criminal fashion. All, very much blaming of the individuals involved, not looking at any wider environmental causes like poverty that might put them into this situation, very much blaming the individual. And the final cause for crime is simple. It's that you make a rational choice. You weigh up, according to Clark, the pros and the cons versus committing a crime. So think about now a crime that we know is very prevalent, that is very, very high reward, low risk. And I'm thinking of shoplifting, something that is dealt with very rarely, something that the police are too busy to deal with. Often shops have to deal with themselves, they've got their own security guards, and they just end up not prosecuting. And the guys who are shoplifting, or the people who are shoplifting, just leave the store. They're never going to get arrested. They're going to very unlikely get a record. They might be able to do it tens of times, hundreds of times before they end up in any kind of trouble. Big reward, low risk. And what do we know about shoplifting rates? Very high. That's the idea behind Clark's rational choice theory. The notion that if you make crime easy and not difficult to get away with, the crime rates are going to rise. Obviously, there are some issues with that. Rational choice theory, if you're thinking about a big con, a big danger after you commit a crime, well, perhaps a death penalty is one. That's probably quite a serious issue and a serious punishment that you could face. So obviously rational choice theory's got a problem, because in countries where there's a death penalty, like America, there's still a very high murder rate in states where they could be killed for committing a murder. So maybe this risk versus reward doesn't quite pay off as the way Clarke would like, but his principal theory on the ground for those blue collar crimes that are quite, not too violent, is that you should make them harsher, you should make the punishments harsher, and that will dissuade people from doing them. That is the right realist view. If we look at the left realist perspective, you can start to see already how it's going to be very, very different. Not the individual to blame, but now the structure of society. And when I think about left realism, from the writers Lee and Young, I think about a triangle. And I think that crime is multifactorial in its cause. There are three factors to crime that Lee and Young would say cause criminality. It is relative deprivation, marginalisation, and the membership in subcultures. So, relative deprivation, what does that mean? Well, if I said to you what deprivation is, you might say when I'm bereft of something, when I don't have something. And that's absolutely true. But this has got a word ahead of it, which is relative. And relative deprivation is mean when I don't have things compared to others around me. So let's say you're in a group of 100 people, and every person's got a mobile phone, but one person cannot afford a mobile phone. They are relatively deprived because their community can, but they don't have the same as their community. Sometimes if you go into other countries that are less economically developed, you might find whole villages where one person's got a mobile phone and 99% of the people haven't. They might be deprived, but they're not relatively deprived. They're not relatively deprived compared to the people next to them. And often, Lee and Young will state that it is the relative nature of deprivation that bubbles up that desire to have what others around me have got and that I want and can't get at the minute. So, relative deprivation. Also, marginalisation. Now, people struggle to remember what marginalisation is. I always say, where's a margin on your page? It's pushed to one side. So, marginalisation, these groups will be pushed to one side. Groups who might have nobody looking out for their interests, who might not have the same level of opportunity, who might not feel as embedded in the community as other groups, tend to join subcultures. Cultures within cultures with different sets of norms and values that might be criminal and might be about money, drugs, gangs, in order to get the things that they are deprived of. Now, if you think logically about Lee and Young's perspective, makes a lot of sense. Both of the realists, we said, agree with the official statistics on crime, agree that the criminals are most likely to be young, working class, ethnic minority males in terms of their overrepresentation levels. And Murray and Bernstein's theory says it's working class people who are less intelligent. Murray would say it's the underclass people who don't socialise properly. So both of these are blaming the groups who are most likely to be on those crime statistics. And it's the same for Lee and Young. Because if you look and say, well, who's most relatively deprived? It might be young ethnic minority men. They're most likely to be marginalised. And if you look at their rates including subcultural membership, they're most likely to be in those as well. The only difference here from Lee and Young is they are not saying it's the individual's fault for being in this situation. They are saying society's fault is for putting them in positions where they are deprived or marginalised. So there is a difference there in who is responsible for this. They want society to be more equal. They don't necessarily want to get rid of capitalism. They just maybe want to be changing capitalism to make society fairer. However, like with all theories, there is a problem here. And it's the idea that this is somewhat deterministic in its thinking, that everybody who's relatively deprived or marginalised does not go on to be a criminal. There can be groups of people who are economic migrants to the country who are going to have less than people around them, who are going to be marginalised and have no one looking out for them, who just get on with it, go through their day trying to make ends meet and trying the best that they can and do nothing criminal and wouldn't have the norms and values to wish to engage in any kind of criminality. So again, this is the theory, this is unpacking it, but all the way through there are evaluation points, and whatever notes that you're making from this, make sure you have those evaluation, because AC3.2 will need you to be able to talk through these and be critical of those theories.